All right, everybody, welcome back to Apex Mind. Adam with you here as always. And on this week's episode, I'd like to welcome to the show Matthew Bibby. Welcome, Matthew.
G'day, Adam. How are you, mate?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Well, thank you.
And I feel like I've already started this off far more formally than I should. I think we'll go with Matt going forward.
Look, let's drop all of the formalities here. Just to be 100% clear, I don't do podcasts. I don't really listen to them. I don't speak on them. I'm not sure how I ended up here. So let's see what happens.
We just kind of stumbled into this and we were hoping for a good conversation. So let's see if we can achieve that goal.
I
So
reckon we can.
I do too. So let's just start off with you said you don't do a lot of podcasts, but you do work in L&D. So tell me a little bit about what you do and what your background is.
I do, sure. My background educationally is in the counselling and psychology side of things. I was very keen on getting into that and being one of the helpers, as you would say. But what I found when going through university to become a psychologist is learning things like that takes an incredibly long period of time. I had 3 young children at the time. Being at university for 7 years really didn't appeal. So I
Mm-hmm.
left that world and got into door-to-door sales. Now, it doesn't get much better than getting dressed up in a suit, brushing your hair, and knocking on someone's door and offering to help them resolve the issue that they have with household debt. As a young 20-year-old bloke, I thought this was incredible. I felt like I was making a real difference in the lives of the families that I was helping with. One of the most interesting meetings that I had, I was sitting with a couple talking about their financial situation, and the wife went upstairs to put the kids to bed. And while she was up there, the husband said to me, "Look, I've actually got about 30 grand on credit cards that the missus doesn't know about. Can we roll those into the home loan and just sort of deal with them here?" A moment later,
Wow.
he stepped upstairs to check on the kids, and it was his wife's turn to let me know about the debts that she had that her husband didn't know about, hoping we could just roll them into the home loan. So I'm deep in this situation, trying to find solutions for these people to get out of their mess. And then I realized that what I was selling them wasn't actually what I thought I was selling them. I was under the impression I was helping these people. But it turns out that the company I was working for was not necessarily all above board. So that was a real point. I was like, hey, wait a second. I thought I was going to be a salesman for this incredible debt reduction strategy, but it turns out they're evil. So I left the sales world after going around and apologizing to all of those customers and doing what I could to make things right. Got into the call center world. Now, the call center world was somewhere that I thought I would stop for about 30 seconds and then continue on to getting a different job. But it turns out that I'm pretty good at talking. And once other people realized that, I got moved up to a quality assurance role where I'd spend my time listening to the calls that other people were making and providing tips so that they could improve. And it was from that position that I first accidentally got into the training world. So from the position that I was at, I could see the mistakes that people were making on the phones that were impacting the service they were providing and were preventing them from hitting all of their statistics and things.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to my boss at the time and said, "I've got an idea. You know how you train these guys for like a month before they go on the phone? What if you gave me one day where I could give them some different tools and different ways of looking at things and dealing with problems so that we could avoid having people starting in the job not having the skills that they need?" And it worked out really well when we sort of did that trial, which then ended up me being moved into a training position there where we sort of rewrote all their training. And for, I don't know, maybe a year or two, I was doing the face-to-face training thing. It was a pretty pretty sort of hectic place. We were often training large groups of people. I remember one day we had a training group on, level 11 and another training group on level 12. And I was literally running between the floors. So I would run up to level 12 and deliver a session on how to ID customers. Then I would handball the group of trainees to an assistant who would run them through some practical work. And I would run back downstairs. And it was chaotic, but I could see that through my actions, through the way that I was able to engage with the people in the room, we could help them learn the skills that they needed to be able to do the job well. But we'd also know, as we were going through that process, the direction that people were going in, which people needed more support, which people needed more help. Which is a point I'll come back to a little bit later. So I did that for a couple of years, doing the training thing. It's wonderful. I really, really loved getting up at 4 a.m., getting on a train, sitting there for an hour, down to the office for those 12-hour days, then back on the train for another hour. It was just a dream. And then one day I needed to work from home. Life circumstances just meant I needed to be there for my kids. And this was back before work from home was really a thing. So I was a little bit stuck, and I went to my boss and said, I heard that part of our company is doing an at-home trial. Is that something I could get involved in? And what they were doing was running call centres in Australia and New Zealand, but people were doing it from home. Before that was commonly done. And it worked out really, really well for the call centres because the people that were taking these calls tended to be university educated, previous management experience, might be taking a break from work to look after their kids or whatever. So suddenly we had a different calibre of people that we could train. So I went and spoke to this guy about getting into this at-home thing. And he said, look, I've heard you're a good trainer. We'll get you in the e-learning department. He handed me a PowerPoint document. He said, I want you to take this home and turn it into an e-learning course. I said, what software do I use to do that? I don't know anything about e-learning. He said, I'm not sure. You're the e-learning expert. So I figured it out. Like, this was early days of Captivate, pre-Articulate Storyline. I think they had Presenter and apps like that out. Everything was Flash. You remember those days.
Oh, yeah.
So I got into e-learning stuff. A lot of what we were doing then was using Captivate. It was creating software simulations. In a lot of cases, the software hadn't actually been built yet. Instead of having software that we could use to create these trainings, we had a bunch of screenshots and a bunch of documentation about how the software should work. So while the software was being developed, we'd be developing training in that, training people up in how that worked. And then when the software was ready, they would start using it in their jobs. The e-learning side of things, it worked okay. It was incredibly time consuming to build those kind of simulations, but it did help bridge that gap. However, it wasn't what really made a difference for those people. What really made a difference for those groups of contractors that we trained for a whole bunch of different campaigns was the community that we built for them. So this was back in the day where we used Basecamp's Campfire as a chat room. We had forums and ran sort of live sessions where people could jump in and ask questions. And it was through that community side of things that people could deepen the understanding of the things that they'd learned in the e-learning courses, build relationships, build. I don't know. It's about getting that support. So at that point, I'm 100% e-learning. E-learning worked really, really great in that company. It enabled us to train people in a way we couldn't, because the only other option was to literally get them in the office there where they'd have access to these systems. But it provided a place where people felt safe. They felt safe exploring information. They felt safe failing, and they were able to get the support that they needed, even if it had nothing to do with the content. There were plenty of times where we'd end up in calls helping people figure out the realities of how do I work from home when I have 17 cats or whatever it is. which goes above and beyond what we were trying to teach them. But it's those interactions that were so important. And that was great. Like I did that for, I don't know, 6, 7 years, something like that. And then the company shut down because of changes in superannuation laws in New Zealand or something like that. And it was at this point that I started freelancing, stepped out on my own, doing the e-learning development thing. And the I guess my experience with e-learning sort of changed at that point, primarily because I wasn't in control of the whole process. So with the at-home call center, I could control the community, could control the training, could control the way that we delivered everything. But when I stepped out as a freelancer, I was a part of a machine, I guess, where companies already had established processes. They'd have instructional designers and videographers and graphic designers and people that they'd work with. And then all of the parts of the puzzle would come to me to put together. Um, and slowly, very slowly, like over a period of 10 years, I realized and then began to, truly accept the reality that the kind of e-learning that I've been building in this time, it's not meeting the needs of these companies. A lot of the time it's focused on the wrong thing. The way that it's built is essentially broken. The way that it's deployed is broken. Um, in a lot of companies, there's no proper feedback loops involved in their training. It's literally just a case of we have a bunch of boxes we need to tick. We need to rebuild these 20 compliance courses this year because something slightly changed. And once those boxes are ticked, nobody cares at all. Um, and it's from that point, I think it's been, for me, it's been a slowly, I mean, it's not that I wasn't aware of this a long time ago, but it takes a while to think through how to how to change systems that, in my opinion, are fundamentally broken.
Well, that's quite the story. I feel like I have a lot of things to unpack here. I've been taking a lot of notes, but let's go through these things somewhat sequentially. But before we do that, I mean, it's just interesting how similar your story is to my story.
Mm,
I also don't have the academic background. I
mm,
also worked in retail and in call centers and kind of just stumbled into L&D because I was good at what I did and they wanted me to help other people get good at what they do. And I
yes,
feel like
yes.
I've come to some of those same realizations that you have over the years. So I want to touch on those realizations, but I want to go back really quick
Mm,
because I think too many people in this industry are too stuck on getting certifications and degrees and the academic side and theory and all these things. And I'm not going to dismiss those at all, but
no.
it feels like sometimes we forget about the real world pieces. So taking the training part out, that early part of your career where you worked in the door-to-door sales and it sounded like a bad experience, and then you worked in the call center, what skills did you grab from that part of your career that helped you as you got later into a
Mm.
learning support type role?
It's a really good question. It Everything comes down to communication in both of those roles, particularly in sales, but also in support. The sales role was highly sort of regulated because we were, selling financial services. There wasn't actually any freedom in the way that we delivered this pitch. So when I started working for this company, before I was able to go out and sell a solution to somebody, I had to learn a 3 hour sales presentation verbatim that I could deliver without any notes. The only thing that I had was a presentation folder that had a graph or a little picture or something on each page.
Mm-hmm.
I had to sit down with their head of sales or whatever it is and do that presentation perfectly before they would even let me out the door. And learning how to remember that much information in such a way that I could present it consistently, despite having finished high school and done university and courses and all of that stuff. There was a part of me that felt like this was the first time I had learnt something that was sort of concrete in a way, because it's like, cool,
Hmm.
I've learned some statistical concepts, or I've learned some psychological concepts, or I've learned some philosophical concepts, or different ways of thinking about things. But here I was, it's like I have to remember these however many thousands of words, and I have to remember the notes about what kind of tone of voice I use at the time that I say it and things like that.
Hmm.
It forced me to look at learning in a different way. It forced me for the first time ever to actually think about, how do we learn things? How do we memorize information? And yeah, it was fascinating in that way. So I think, to answer your question, the skills that I got from everything that came before the point that I got into training, it all comes down to communicating with people, relationships, understanding things like that.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, you talk about communication. I feel like you also learned benefits of how to obtain a whole lot of product knowledge. I guess you mentioned
Mm,
learning there, right? I think in order to be good at teaching others, you have to also be good at learning. So that that's
agreed.
that's awesome. I really think that anybody who's in any kind of like teaching or training support type role, it helps you to get multidisciplinary like that,
Mm,
whether it be sales skills or copywriting skills or human psychology type stuff that I'm sure you learned
mm,
when you were in university. Um, I also found it interesting when you were in that call center world, which was something I did for a number of years as
mm.
well, that you added on top of the training a more practical, it sounded like it was like soft skills based practice
Yep,
at the end. What was the thing that led to you adding that solution to the
sure.
existing training?
The way that it worked is there was 4 weeks of training. Now this was a couple of decades ago. I can't remember all of the details, but essentially they would spend a week or two teaching people about the product knowledge of this system, and there was quite a lot of information to remember, different plans and packages, and all of that stuff. Then they would spend multiple weeks training people in the system that was used to manage these accounts, which was a lovely DOS-based system. So it was fun to learn and fun to use, especially because a lot of the people who were coming into this call center were kind of straight out of school and hadn't really messed around with some of those older systems.
Hmm.
Then there would be 1 hour where the quality assurance person would come into the room and would talk to people about what that quality framework looked like. Like, okay, point number one, we need to make sure that we identify people appropriately. Point number two, we need to make sure we use positive terms, or whatever it is. Then people would be, essentially, they would go and start on the job. They'd have a bit of support while they were first practicing, then they'd be on their own. But the problem was, what they needed people to do wasn't to understand product knowledge, and it wasn't to push buttons in a system. It was actually to maintain and deepen a relationship with the customer who was on the phone. It was to make sure that people were being heard and felt supported and weren't being rushed, and all of those things. So when I added that day onto the training, the whole point of the day was to focus on bringing all of those skills that they had been learning together and practicing them in a real life scenario. So there was nothing revolutionary about it. It was simply that, from the position of being the person who was listening to these phone calls, and I'd pay a lot of attention to people who were just starting there, you could see that they had the product knowledge. You could see that they were okay using the system, but they just weren't that great at talking to people. So by focusing on that, we were able to bring down the amount of mistakes they were making on the call. We were able to make sure that the people they were speaking to were feeling happy with the exchange. But we also found that as they became more confident and felt more competent, that they were actually better at keeping the calls short and better at managing the time in there. So rather than putting someone on hold and going getting help because you weren't quite sure about how to say something, because they had spent more time practicing conflict resolution or whatever it is, they were more equipped to do the job that they were being trained for.
Yeah, you mentioned that you don't think it was revolutionary, but it shocks me that even to this day, I mean, you say decades after this time where you were in this part of your career, there are so many trainings that are just information and trying to have people
Mm,
learn things and know things rather than being able to do things. So,
absolutely.
yeah, it may not be revolutionary, but there are a lot of trainings that are delivered in a variety of industries that don't have the application and the
Yep.
context that's real built into them.
Which sort of goes back to what I was saying before about ticking the boxes and getting the courses built. Now, I've worked for probably hundreds of companies. I've definitely worked on thousands and thousands of e-learning courses. And the vast majority of them, there is no real consideration for whether or not what's being built is going to meet the needs. In some cases, they don't even know what they need before building this course. But there are much better ways of doing things, like to stick with the call center example. Call centers have a whole bunch of systems that all work well together. They communicate together. We have real-time queues to manage. We have different types of calls coming in. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in that operations department to make sure that the right calls are going to the right people.
Hmm.
Everybody who's trained, there's records of what they've been trained in a learning management system. So we know that Adam has done the module on customer privacy.
Hmm.
We then have a QA department who's listening to these calls, sometimes in real time, and going through and going, Adam's made a mistake here, Matt's made a mistake here, this is a real issue, we need to flag this with the manager. But the systems aren't talking to each other. Imagine a world where, as that quality assurance person is listening to the call and they recognize that Adam or Matt or whoever it is hasn't identified a customer properly, they could press a button in their system which would immediately remove that person from the queue that delivers them calls that they're having trouble with. The LMS could then assign them a couple of micro learning courses over the next few days to remind them of the importance of customer privacy, the importance of managing that properly. At no point since that issue was identified would that person receive any more calls that requires them to ID people until they've finished the multiple micro-learning courses and then had a meeting with their manager, which could also be scheduled by the system too, had a meeting with their manager so that they can confirm 100% that that person now understands how to do their job properly. What happens though in the real, well, not in the real world, but in the majority of cases, is that no one's actually sat down and thought through the way this stuff should work. And I get it. For a long time, we've been dealing with these LMSs that are isolated with every completion record, locked away in something. You got to search down 15 levels of stuff to find.
Hmm.
It's not about collecting the data to say someone finished this course. That data should mean something. It should tie into other parts of your business, and we have to keep following those paths through and seeing the opportunities that there are to get feedback back from the other end to keep things flowing. Because to me, as it is now, these e-learning courses are getting built, they're getting put up somewhere. It's like, cool, go do this, and then no one ever thinks about it again. And there are so many missed opportunities.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great, and I agree with you of the need to make things individualized. One thing you might have implied this, but I didn't hear it, is sometimes those solutions are just these blanket solutions. So,
Mm,
oh, we see X amount of our agents are not negotiating credits and they're giving too large of credits. Let's throw a credit training at them, rather than what I think you sound mentioned is a more prescriptive,
of course.
individualized solution. And I know that's more difficult, and that's maybe why we do the blanket solutions. But the blanket solutions are often not leading to the results we want.
Mm,
One more thing from that part of your career. I know you mentioned that you were also jumping between multiple classes and you felt like you were pulled in a lot of directions. This is something that I feel like is very common for a lot of people who work for L&D teams at companies. And even today, I
mm.
think this is still a problem where people feel like they're pulled in too many directions to be effective. Um, what did you do to maximize that effectiveness and ensure you were dealing with the differing needs of where you're being pulled?
Good question. Not quite sure how to answer it. The only thing that came to mind then is I remember one of those days running up that staircase, trying to get back up to level 12 to teach the next part to that course. And I tripped on the stairs and I grated my face on the rough bricks along the side.
Wow.
And I didn't stop. I ran right back into that room with blood weeping down my face because getting these 100 people trained by the end of the week in order to have them on the phone was the most important thing at the time. My understanding of learning and development and my understanding of how to train people has, of course, matured a lot since then. I actually came across a training plan I wrote at around that time. A couple of years ago, and it was fascinating opening it because I could tell by looking at it how much time I had spent picking the fonts and
Mhm.
figuring out exactly the right amount of letter spacing to have on that heading. So it says a lot about where my focus was at the time. I think the biggest thing that I learnt about training people when I was training face to face was that while you can have a training session or a training solution that can deliver meet the needs of the majority of people in the room, there are often things that we do not see that can prevent people from learning, even when everything's right. And as I said, like my training sessions back then were pretty average in comparison to how I would structure them today. But
Mhm.
we got the results that we wanted most of the times. When we didn't get the results that we wanted, I found it was often due to things that had nothing to do with learning. It was often due to people's personal stuff that they had going on. There's two people I'm thinking of at the moment. One of them was a girl who sat at the back of the class and didn't really engage in any of the activities we do. And over the week or whatever, it became obvious that she was a bit disconnected from the group. Near the end of that time, I pulled her aside and had a chat with her about how she felt about this, whether the information was getting through, whether she was interested in continuing, etc., etc. And I found out that on day 2 of her doing that training, she'd been kicked out of home.
Oh,
She
wow.
had turned 18, and on her birthday, her parents had said, "We want nothing further to do with you." She had no money, no proper identification, no real solution other than staying on the couch with friends until she gets through this training because it's the only income that she has coming in. So immediately at that point, it was pretty clear that there was more that we could do to support her because how can she be expected to learn when her whole mind was focusing on dealing with this crisis? Um, and I think while that's a pretty specific case to that particular person in that particular time, I think it's really important to remember that training is not a one-way thing. It's not just about making information available, even if that information is incredibly well structured and you've ticked all the boxes as far as good instructional design goes. If you have people who aren't feeling comfortable, aren't feeling safe, have much more important priorities that they won't be able to learn. And what I see time and time and time again is that companies have systems built for delivering training, but there is nothing built into that system that allows feedback, that allows for an individual to see another individual who might be struggling, and as a human go, hey, do you need a hand with something? And after that point in my career, I went out freelance, built e-learning for a really long time. All of these e-learning courses, they're all pretty much the same, like a lot of e-learning courses,
Hmm.
e-learning course, e-learning course, e-learning course, great, ticked all the boxes, it's done. But there's no community there, and there's no human connection there. Now, not always. I know there's some companies who are doing incredibly well with these kind of things, but most of the time it's just a one way, throwing content at people. And I think we're missing a real trick there. I think online training's obviously not going anywhere, and it's obviously really important for a lot of reasons. But I think in a lot of cases we have swung way too far over to the impersonal side. And I think that is to the detriment of everybody.
Yeah, I hear that. I think back on those years where I was a trainer that was in a classroom and the relationships that were forged, and you know, I had some stories that I probably wouldn't share all these stories in a public forum, but people that had troubles outside of work like that, and it's affecting their learning. I mean, Maslow's hierarchy is a real thing, and what's that base layer? It's that
Yeah, yeah,
physiological needs and
that's it.
emotional needs are the base of the triangle, right? So you can't learn if you don't have those things taken care of. Um, with the fact that you had worked remotely from home in a period where before this was very common. It's really common now, but it wasn't
Mm,
back when you started doing it.
mm.
What are some of the biggest learnings you've had of how to effectively, create that culture, create that support system in a remote world?
Um, it comes down to being present and being real with people. For anyone who's ever been, involved in a community that I'm part of, you'll know that I am online all of the time, and I respond to stuff pretty quickly if I feel inclined to.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest part, particularly in the initial stages while people were joining that sort of at home environment, before they developed relationships and friendships with other people there, it was the fact that I was always present. Even outside of hours, if a question got posted, there's a pretty good chance you would get a response from me 5 minutes later. And it wouldn't be a, yeah, no worries, check page 4 of the course for details on that. It would be a real human response. And when I look at companies who are doing well in the e-learning space, it is those who have built communities around their products that are by far the most successful. And it's got nothing to do with the software or the solution or the framework or anything like that that's being sold. It all comes down to community. And I think as now my experience in the e-learning world is different to a lot of people's because I have focused on development, and I have primarily worked in positions where I'm building courses that other people want built. But I've seen inside a lot of different companies and agencies and providers and things like that. And I've got a pretty
Mhm.
good idea how a lot of this stuff's being built. And I don't think I don't think that these solutions are good enough for the times that we live in. If I was to go and, start a new job, and my first 3 days at that company were sitting down at my desk going through boring e-learning courses in order to learn the skills that they think I need to do for the job that I'm already qualified for, I wouldn't make it to the end of the first day.
Mhm.
I've got sort of teenage and young adult children. My eldest daughter, who's in her early 20s, was saying to me that if she started a job and saw the storyline preloader, she would walk out before the course had even loaded because in her mind, a company who is trying to train modern employees using the tools of yesterday, it says so much about the way their organization is run. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Let's get into the spicy part of the interview because, unfortunately, in the L&D world, we're all too damn positive, and we all just like to blow air at each other and act like we're doing these things. And actually, I've seen times where, I'm glad you identified some concerns with trainings not delivering in the past, but I've seen too many L&D teams that blame it on the work group that they're supporting, or hey, the management's not backing this up.
Mm.
In reality, and I hate to be this blunt about it, I know sometimes I get pushback on LinkedIn when I post things like this, but I think just the e-learning, or even just classroom training, this formalized information-based training is just not cutting it. And I don't think it's
Mm.
just for the Gen Z folks. I think it's for, I'm what they call an elder millennial, even though I'm offended by that term. I think a lot of us are used to, when we want to learn something outside of work, I go to Google or I go to YouTube and I learn it and I apply it right away. I do not go read a book or take an extended course. And so, I don't know, just in your opinion, are we at this point where the old way of producing highly produced trainings is something that needs to be left to the past? And do we need to pivot to, maybe it doesn't have to be quite as produced, and we just need to deliver something that will help people to do the things they need to do, even if it's shorter, less pretty, or whatnot? What are your thoughts on that?
100%. And I don't think that time is now. I think that time was at least 5 years ago. I really, really do. It's hard because, as I said, I've worked for a lot of different companies and I've worked for a lot of agencies that are sort of between the client who's requesting the training and me who's building the training. But what I see a lot of the time, and I don't know how to put this in appropriate terms. Wait a second, I'll just find a word that I can say in public. It comes down to there's a certain lack of confidence, perhaps, or a lack of gumption, if that's even a word. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I feel like it's appropriate here.
Mm-hmm.
We have clients who are like, we want a course that is this. They hire experts to deliver that solution. Those experts then do exactly what they are told, even though they know better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll put my hand up as being guilty of this. I have built 1,000 terrible e-learning courses. I didn't feel terrible about it at the time because I was doing exactly what the client wanted. I was giving them exactly what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you look at how this stuff's being used or not used, you look at how effective it's being or ineffective it's being, you look at how much money is being spent on this, how much time is being wasted. For every time you have 3 people in your L&D team working on a course in Storyline or Captivate or Lectora or whatever it is for a month to produce something that goes for 20 or 30 minutes that is overly wordy, doesn't really meet the objectives. There's no way for people who are doing that job and actually know better than half of the people in the L&D team to go, hey, that information's actually wrong, or that process changed, or I don't understand this. How can I get some more support? The whole thing's broken. We are literally just getting piles and piles of money, usually tax dollars. It's coming out of your and my pocket to spend on this stuff that is
Mm-hmm.
just pointless. Sure, we ticked the box. Yeah, we built the 18 courses. Yeah, 98% of people did the compliance training, but did they learn anything? Often not. So I go back to what used to work. When I first got into this online training stuff, what worked was community. I look back at what used to work for the ancient Greeks. It was community, that they
Mm-hmm.
would sit on those porches and they would talk philosophy. It wasn't the way that they spoke that helped people learn these things. It was the community. It was the fact that you could ask questions, you could challenge, you could clarify. I would like to see a much bigger shift back towards that. And there's definitely platforms that people are using that tick a lot of those boxes. And there's definitely platforms out there that have a lot more opportunities for feedback to go in all directions and things like that. But overall, for the majority of companies out there, what they're doing is broken, in my opinion. And it's not a case of let's just build a better course next time with some 360-degree images and another stupid Beyond animation. It's actually fundamentally, we need to go back to ground zero. We need to have a look at what's broken now and figure out a plan to deliver better solutions in the future. And building another e-learning course or swapping LMSs is not the answer.
Yeah, I say this far too often, but I feel like it bears saying again that I don't think any training should ever be just a course. There should always be something else accompanying it. And your thoughts about community are so big because I mentioned the Google and YouTube. This is what a lot of workers are doing, right?
Yep.
If they have a question, they're probably not going to your LMS to answer it. They're looking it
Yep.
up on Google. They're looking it up on YouTube or wherever else. Or if they can't find the answers there, what do? They go ask a coworker, which is, to your point, that's
Hmm.
community. And I see some L&D teams that slap hands or are mad when people go outside the standard process. And it's like, well, why would you ask people to learn differently than they want to learn?
Yeah.
Um, so to that point, I know this might be a little outside of what you're doing day to day because you are producing courses. But what are your thoughts about content curation and have you seen that done well?
Um, I, I haven't seen it done well. I'm sure there are people doing it well, but it's not really a process I've been involved in.
Okay.
I think when people have access to these platforms that have millions and millions and millions of courses, content
Mhm.
curation is 100% necessary. When I look at skills I've learnt in the past, like I'm just thinking of some programming skills, it wasn't a case of go and do this one course by this one person. It was more about that customized pathway. So I had somebody much more experienced than me say, Matt, I want you to go read the first 3 chapters of this book on GitHub. Then I want you to go watch these 2 videos by that person. Then I want you to go back, skip the next 3 chapters. They're pointless for what you're working on. I want you to start on chapter 7, then jump over to this other resource here.
Mhm.
And it's through that somebody who had already walked this path was able to show me the way through. So I think there is an incredible amount of value there. The other thing that I think needs to happen is L&D needs to get out of the way. Um, there are so many people in your company right now who understand the job that they are doing incredibly well and are in the best position to not only recommend better ways to work or changes to processes that might help the business, but are also in the best position to explain how to do these things for new people who are coming in. Now, obviously, not everyone who's skilled in a task is necessarily skilled at teaching someone else. But with the right support from people who are very good at this stuff, we can help encourage people in that direction. So rather than the whole L&D team being locked in a back room working on a course to try and explain to a department how they do the work after the L&D had to go sit with them for a month to understand how it works and still don't really get it, what we should be doing is using tools that make it a lot easier to create stuff. So rather than sitting in the back room, fiddling around in Storyline or whatever for a month, building, this thing that has things that move and glitter or whatever your aim is, use tools that enable you to put out information in hours or minutes rather than days or weeks. Have proper feedback loops built into it. So when somebody puts some training out there, the people who are doing the training can go, hey, this is really good. Or actually, I found that this solution works better or whatever. The L&D's role, in my opinion, or what it, at least a part of it should be in a lot of companies, is about supporting your subject matter experts to feel confident in putting out training and sharing their expertise. It's acting as, let people check in and go, hey, I'm thinking about making a 5-minute video on how to do this in this tool. And perhaps the L&D team might be like, well, we've actually got 3 other people who are working on that at the moment, but your expertise around this would be really good. Or perhaps if we broke it up like this and presented it like this or whatever. So
Mhm.
look, I don't develop courses anymore. Like I've been building e-learning for 15 years or whatever, way, way, way too long. The other day, I had the joy of uninstalling Parallels off from my Mac. There is no more Windows, there is no more Storyline. I'm just not interested in doing it anymore. And for me, it comes down to the fact that I I disagree with e-learning courses, in the way that they've been done as being a valid solution. And personally, over the past few years over the really long time, but particularly the past few years, my displeasure with this type of work and these type of solutions has grown to a point that it has majorly impacted my physical health. So it's not just the repetitive motions that come from having 12 hours 12 hours a day using a mouse, trying to get the rounded corners of everything exactly right, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that knowledge that there are better ways to work, there are better ways to support people who are learning, there are better ways that these companies could be spending their money and actually getting better outcomes than they are now. So for me, I've been here, quietly working away on these courses that everyone wants built, while this feeling grows inside of me of what I'm doing here isn't actually producing the value it used to. What I'm doing here is actually harming the efforts of these companies. So when you are spending $500,000 a year, or $1 million a year, or 30 grand a year, or whatever it is, on external, contractors to take your PowerPoint documents and build a course exactly like you want them built,
Hmm.
it's a waste of money, waste of effort, waste of time, and doesn't achieve the goals that anyone is setting out to do. Yet, if you could work with experts in the L&D space and actually listen to them and actually change the way that you're doing things, like, you would not believe the amount of courses I've gone back to, like my client or whatever, and gone, hey, this really isn't good. There's some fundamental flaws here and some major issues here. And the feedback from them has been, yeah, but it's what the client wants.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, we hire experts for a reason. I don't hire a builder to come over here and then insist he uses super glue to build my house. That would be silly. I assume that a builder would know, like, nails and screws and hammers and things. But in the L&D space, so frequently I see people going out and paying top dollars for experts in their field, and then insisting that they build another pile of rubbish. And I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah, I don't either. And there was a lot of things you said there that very much match up to my view of where L&D is, and the lack of results that a lot of it has. Our time's short, but I want to touch on a couple things. So
Mm-mm.
you mentioned the importance of mentorship. So you had someone who was, instead of having a curated path, this expert helped curate a path for you. And I think
Yes,
mentorship is huge. I
agreed.
worked with a company a few years ago where new employees would come in and we would match them up with a tenured, we called it a buddy program, but it's a mentor, right? It's someone to help
Mm,
walk you through that. I think that's huge. And you touched on curation. When I first asked about it, I'm not talking about a massive online catalog. I
gotcha.
absolutely hate LinkedIn Learning. I hate all those. They're, I guess, fine, but you touch on it towards the end. Use those subject matter experts. You have people in your company that can help
Oh,
build the
absolutely.
training, and you're just the person that helped design it. I think that is powerful curation, instead of the L&D team thinking they know better than the people who are doing the job. You know what I'm saying?
It's Look, it's funny though, because I'm seeing a lot of resistance from instructional designers, particularly around this topic. And I don't want to, for a second, not value the contributions of an incredible instructional designer. But I'm
Hmm.
also going to be straight up here and tell you that over the past, 15 years I've been doing this stuff, the vast majority of instructional designers that I've worked with haven't actually been very good instructional designers. In my mind, and this is just like a little thing I made up, there's instructional designers who are people who really get this stuff. Then there's e-learning instructional designers who just have click and reveals in their toolkit. The
Hmm.
amount of courses that I've looked at, the original content that's come from the SME, and I've looked at the storyboard that an ID has worked on for weeks, and all that I've seen is a little bit of chunking and a couple of click and reveals and stuff. It's like there is so much more to this. Yet when we bring up the idea of allowing SMEs to create training by giving them tools that are much easier to use and simplifying the process and taking the gatekeepers out of it, there's all these IDs who seem to be up in arms about it. And I think it's because they genuinely believe that the quality of the training will be so much worse. But I don't think that's the case at all. I
Yeah.
think I think the change that needs to happen is those instructional designers who are good at this stuff, and there's some incredible people out there who have a wealth of knowledge on learning that I would love to have. Like I sit in a room with these people, it's like you guys know so many smart words. Um, for them to be in a position where they can mentor subject matter experts who are interested in creating content to solve the problems that they have within their departments, I can see this over time being a wonderful, wonderful thing, because you don't need 10 instructional designers in your company. You need a couple of really good ones. Then you need to build some systems where they can support and help upskill your SMEs. Over time, in every department, you'll have budding instructional designers. Then over time, they'll move out to other companies and spread that goodness throughout. In 5 years' time, I can see a world where training is being created frequently by people who aren't in the L&D department, with the L&D's department's role being to support those people and guide them. And
Hmm.
to me, that is so much more valuable than these people who have all of this knowledge about learning just sitting there clicking buttons in Storyline in a dark room for a month.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's, I've always thought about it this way, is that management, SMEs, these roles that are not in a training role, they're delivering training anyway, whether we like it or not. And the way I see it is they're doing it because they feel like the product that's being provided to them from their L&D team is not cutting it.
Mm,
So why fight against them, or why be separate from them? Let's work together. It's the whole, I grew up on the area of Captain Planet. I believe in when our powers are combined, we can
mm,
achieve
mm,
greatness.
mm.
And it just feels like there's this adversarial thing, and it makes me sad. But I like how, I know you and I have kind of pointed out a lot of problems. What you just said there was very aspirational and positive for the future. So I think that's about as good of a place to wrap this up as any, so that we can end on a good note. But before we do that, I have a couple things. Is first of all, if anyone wants to connect with you and hasn't yet, where is the best place that people can find you?
Just at my domain, matthewbibby.com. My email's there. You can jump into a chat if you want. Yeah, but that's the place, or LinkedIn, I guess. Or you can just call me up on the phone. I'll probably answer it.
Awesome. Well, I'll put your website and your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if anyone
Sweet.
hasn't connected with you, they can. And I know I warned you about this up front, but I want to know, what's one thing you have learned lately, either personal or professional, that you think has been of value to your life?
Mm. Stress is really bad for you. And when you allow stress and unhappiness about your contributions to the world to sort of sneak into your life, that can be really problematic. And for me, I knew the stress was there. I knew this dissatisfaction was there, but I didn't do anything about it until it was too late, until it had manifested physically and caused very real issues that impacted my life. So if there's part of you that is not happy with the contributions that you're making in your professional life, or your personal life, of course, but here I'm talking about the professional stuff, it's really important to face that and to figure out a way to contribute something else, because as I touched on before, this dissatisfaction with e-learning has been growing in me for a period, a long while. But I'm a single dad with 3 kids I got to look after. It was pretty easy to just keep doing the stuff I'd always been doing to pay the bills. But those feelings, that stress, that unhappiness, if left unchecked it will have a very real impact on your life. So anyone out there who's in the L&D space who is not happy with the way things are looking, and I've been speaking to a lot of these people lately, particularly people sort of in the development space who, I've got one mate whose average earnings are down probably 35% on last year, just to changes in the industry, and he's feeling pretty stuck. If you're feeling that way, I'm happy to have a chat with you about different options, or even just listen to the stuff that's going on, because we can't do this alone. The L&D community is an absolutely incredible place. I've had so much help from people recently in this space that's really opened up my world in ways that I couldn't necessarily have anticipated. So if you love L&D but aren't happy with your current contributions to that space, there are other options, and there are other avenues for you to explore ways that you can give more.
That's amazing. I think we can all use a little bit less stress and more purpose and meaning in our life. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, anyone who needs that help, I mean, there's a whole lot of us building community out. And I know Matt's great. We've connected recently, and connect with him, connect with me, and we'll be happy to help you through those tough times. Well, Matt, this was absolute pleasure. Geez, we didn't know if we'd fill up a whole hour, and look at where we are now. So Matt, we'll have to do this again sometime, because I think
For
we have
sure,
plenty
Adam.
more
Thank
things
you.
to talk about.
Yeah, it was good fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. And for everyone at home, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode, and have a great one.